Hello and welcome back to The Advisor. I am co-host Lisa Urbanski. And when I saw the guest for today and what she was going to talk about, I got really fired up because this stuff just lights me up, and all of you are going to relate to it so much. So I'm about to bring Catherine Corona to the floor, let her have the stage, but I want to introduce her. So Catherine has had a meditation and spiritual practice for over 60 years. She is the founder of soulandspirit.net, which is a daily spiritual practice program, and it includes five ancient sacred practices delivered to the participants every single day. So, Dr. Corona, she's an award-winning filmmaker, singer, composer, and author, and she has been an invited speaker at the University of Wyoming, Denver University, and Peace Theological Seminary and College of Philosophy.
You got
So
it.
many words, as well as podcasts, and has been a presenter at yoga festivals. Oh my God, how excited am I to introduce you, Catherine? Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Lisa, for having me.
Amazing. And can you tell our listeners and our viewers where you're coming in from today?
Well, I'm here at the base. I'm just outside of Boulder, Colorado, out in the rural part of Boulder County at the base of the Rocky Mountains.
Mm.
So, yeah.
And you were just telling me about the windstorm that's going on.
We have these windstorms, especially in the spring, and they're pretty common, and they're pretty intense. So, sometimes up to it's not unusual to have 80-mile-an-hour gusts here.
Wow, 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
It
Everything
must be loud.
blows, things are blown all over the place. So, we learn to lock them down and walk in the wind.
Wow. Talk about the universe. They kind of like cleansing your area. It's
It
like
feels
getting rid
like
of
that.
everything.
It feels like that. Cleans out the air. And yeah, it feels like that.
So cool. So cool. And how excited am I to, kind of like start chatting with you about this topic that we haven't even told our audience that we're talking about yet.
Right.
So, Catherine's going to talk to us about the levels of consciousness and different spiritual practices. And Catherine, 60 years. Wow.
60 years. So I was it's actually a little bit longer if you consider I started a practice by asking myself a question when I was 5 of what is more than I can see.
Mm.
So when I looked in the world, I happened to be out in Wisconsin near the Canadian border. Um, Go Canada.
Yes.
Go Canada. I know Lisa's from Canada, so um, I I was looking at it was the first day I was able to go on myself in a walk in the woods.
Mm.
And I was very quiet and silent. I was like pretending to walk as silently as I could so the animals wouldn't be disturbed. And in that stillness, and I'd learned to be very still as a very young child to be able to go out in the fishing boats, which was a big honor as a little kid. And
Mm.
so I learned to be still, and that practice just stayed with me. But in that moment of being still in the woods, I looked up through the canopy of trees and I thought to myself, this isn't real. It's beautiful,
Okay.
and the trees and the sky, there's more to this.
Mm.
And I did have an experience of the curtain parting, the canopy of trees, and seeing through it to something bigger than was right in front of my eyes. And so
Wow.
that set me off as a very little kid to have a contemplative practice because I learned that in stillness and getting really quiet, I could have a greater perception of what was beyond myself, what was beyond what I could see with my eyes, and how I fit in it. So, where did I belong? Where was my place of belonging? Which I think a lot of children might start to think about when they're getting ready to go to school and they've maybe been, if they haven't had preschool, they've been at home with their mom or with the caretaker or whatever. And now it's a big transition. And and we have that consciousness of where do I belong in all this? Where do I
Hmm.
belong in this world? And my question at that age was, where do I belong in the creation of the universe? And
Hmm.
then how do I experience it?
Yes.
So through the years, then that led me on this path of awakening consciousness, of spiritual practices, of learning what was beyond me, whatever word you want to call it,
Hmm.
spirit, soul, God,
Yeah, everyone calls it
cosmic
something
con.
different.
The words don't matter, and we all have our own language and semantics and lingo about this. So just whatever, resonates for you. It's all the same,
Hmm.
and then I wound up studying many different faith traditions from Sufism, the esoteric branch of Islam. I lived next to some people that had Archie Fire Lame Deer's son of John Fire Lame Deer, who was a medicine man that wrote Lame Deer's Secret Visions. So I got to go to Lakota ceremonies despite myself. It just happened to be on the ranch where I was living. And I learned a lot about the Lakota traditions and got to participate in them and experience them.
Beautiful.
I don't really know. I mean, they were all in Lakota at the time.
Hmm.
So there was nothing in English. So all I had was my experience. So I couldn't ask anybody questions. They didn't speak English, or if they did, they weren't speaking English. So it set me on this path from that. So yeah, 60 years because I started really young with a
Wow.
contemplative practice. And then over the years, I tried different meditative practices. I live in a place in Boulder, Colorado that has a big Tibetan Buddhist community. So
Mm.
my first official meditation classes were Buddhist sitting meditations. And then I also learned from the same ranch. Some people moved out, the Lakota people moved out, and Sufis moved in, and there was a great spiritual teacher there. So, despite myself, these teachers came wafting through my life because of where I lived.
Right.
But there was a part of
Right.
my consciousness that obviously was asking those deep inner questions and wanted to know what was deeper than the physical life and how I fit in that, how each human person fit in that, what was their
Hmm.
part, what was the instrument they were playing in their symphony, um,
Hmm.
and and then the different spiritual practices that came with the different faith traditions. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Hmm.
And how powerful to learn how to quiet the mind. Like that is, I mean, when I think of different levels of consciousness and meditation, I think of quieting the mind. Like that's how I speak about it. Can you
Okay.
kind of speak on that and how you feel about that and like what's been the most powerful experience? Maybe actually tell us what you got started with doing. I mean, you're 5 years old. You have this
Right.
already understanding of a world that nobody else really understands at that point. So that must have been something else too, is like, how did you feel in that moment? Did you relate to other people? What was that like?
Hmm. That's a really interesting question because, well, certainly my family couldn't relate to me too much. And I learned pretty quickly not to ask those questions to my family. I just had them within myself because
Mm.
they didn't know what to make of me. I think in today's day and age, people are much more aware, much more
Yeah.
conscious. So when they have children like this that are asking deeper questions or very empathetic and very sensitive, um, many parents are much more open to exploring different things with their children. At least that's what I find where I live in Boulder, Colorado. And granted,
Okay.
Boulder, Colorado is a very progressive place in terms of consciousness. We have Tibetan Buddhists here. We had the self-realization fellowship people here, Yoganandas. There was just many things. So I don't know too much about the rest of the world, but I think people are in general much more open for their children's own exploration. And
Mhm.
maybe it's just they're more kind on the baseball field or the soccer field when they're out there at 8 years old, and the parents are teaching more kindness. Um,
Mhm.
but it's a great time in life to be, because the consciousness is really changing
Mhm.
to greater awareness.
Can you
Um,
speak on that? What do you mean by that for our listeners who don't quite understand that?
so I know it might seem with what's happening in our world that there's a lot of conflict and sort of craziness going on right in this day, in this week, this month. But really when you dig in and you look deeper, there is a greater consciousness. You can see it in everything. I mean, I even see it on the news shows where where they say, "Oh, love ya." I mean, people didn't do that 30 years ago. People didn't say, "Yeah, I love ya." "Oh, I love you guys so much." Just that one thing shows the change of consciousness, the kindness, the acting from the heart, from the awareness, the questions that I asked when I was little, but people are beginning to ask now. And you started with quieting the mind. I look at it a little bit different than quieting the mind. I think if you, I think a lot of people come to me and they say, I can't quiet my mind. I can't sit in meditation and I can't sit in stillness or mindfulness because my mind just, monkey mind, it just goes on and on. Buddha said that, coined the term, we have this monkey mind.
Yeah, I know a
So,
lot of people who try and meditate and they just say they absolutely can't.
right, right. And I think it's because the approach, many of those people's approach. I had a conversation with a horse trainer this morning about that. And she didn't even know I was a meditator. I had this long practice, but she would just start talking about it. I'd like to sit down. And I said, well, I can't get my mind to quiet. I think that's the wrong approach. I don't think the mind is meant necessarily to be quiet and to be still. It's meant to
Mm.
think and help us negotiate life and look for the mountain lions that are coming around the corner. But what happens when you practice a stillness or a spiritual practice, over time, the mind organically begins to get quieter. It just naturally does.
Hmm.
So than approaching meditation directly into, I'm going to quiet my mind, you're going to set yourself up for failure that way. And that's why
Okay.
people get frustrated. Oh, they
Mm.
sit down and they go, I'm going to quiet your mind. It's like, think of Pete. Do not think of pink elephants.
That's all I'm going
What?
to think about.
Right. So you sit down and go, I'm going to quiet my mind. Okay. You just told your mind
To be
that
super
you,
active because you're trying to quiet it.
exactly. So rather, I like a mantra meditation. And
Mm.
this is what I learned in Sufism. And also, I studied with a Hindu teacher. The mantra meditation. So, a mantra is a word or a syllable. Usually, in the Hindu sense, a Sanskrit word carries a certain vibrational frequency. So let's say you want to open your heart. You want to just go into that tender, loving, nurturing. There's this beautiful syllable in Sanskrit, just ma. And that's where mother comes from, mare, ocean. It's just this very nurturing and it carries that vibe with it. So you can put your mind inwardly on ma and just do that, but you can use any word you want. So I wanted to see where love would take me, not a romantic love, but the love of nurturing, caring, receptivity, wanting the well-being of others. So I started to use love as a mantra.
Mm.
You
That's
could use
beautiful.
God. Yeah. And I just practice that. So what you do is you just inwardly, or you could do it outwardly, just over and over chant that word love or ma
In
or
your mind.
whatever,
In
or
your mind.
om in your
Correct?
mind, in your mind.
Yes.
Now you've given your mind something to focus on.
Right.
Now the mind,
And so when I'm chanting my mantra and I get distracted, then I come back to that. Is that
yes,
it?
exactly.
Okay. So that's just natural and normal. So we're all natural and normal. So everyone's trying to learn how to meditate and they feel like they're not doing it correctly, even though their brain is just being natural and normal. And by being able to hone back in on your mantra is the meditation, correct?
Correct. That is the
Wow.
meditation. So that is so simple. So think of it like this. Have you ever sung a song?
Always.
All right. And is your mind chattering to you when you're singing?
No.
Exactly. So
Mm,
if you're doing your sound or your tone, your mantra, or your word, any of those things, your mind starts to go into that. It gives it a focus, gives it a
mhm,
target. And then you be quiet and listen
mm,
and just listen and feel. And there's a wave, a current that then you can step into. This is a field of energy that comes from the highest place of consciousness. So we're talking about levels of consciousness. We brought up that in the beginning. We have our physical body. This is kind of metaphysical stuff, but you can learn it and experience it in your meditation when you're in the quiet part of listening. So we have our body, very aware of that. Just above the body, we have what in metaphysics is called the astral level. It's kind of the imagination. Just
okay.
above, all right? The imagination, it's just above that. Is I'll go back because it popped into my mind. Um, a lot of people that do some of the psychedelics, that opens up a door into that astral level.
Mm, mhm,
And that's about as high as it gets. And that can be controversial because people love their psilocybin mushrooms and their things like that. And I understand that. Grew up in the 70s. I had my moments with that. So I get it,
mhm.
but it's not very high.
Okay.
It's kind of upper astral level and it can open things up, but then you can't get beyond that. And beyond that, we go into the mental level. It's
Okay.
kind of has a yellow color and it kind of buzzes and it has a faster energy. Beyond that is the causal levels, the emotional level, and these correspond with the energy centers or the chakras. And then beyond
Mm,
that is the etheric, which corresponds to the unconscious, subconscious. And then beyond that is what is sometimes called the cosmic mirror, or there's a void there. It's very quiet, kind of empty. The cosmic mirror is this level in the consciousness that reflects yourself back to you.
I
And
hear a
so,
lot of people use the term enlightenment. So which
okay,
state of consciousness would that fall under?
it's a
Is
great
that
question.
right at the top?
And so beyond, it's beyond the top. So
Oh,
beyond
okay.
the cosmic mirror, there's a channel there, so to speak. It's metaphorical, but and beyond that is what are called the soul levels. And that is where people attain a level of enlightenment. Now, that's a paradox. I say people attain, but the great paradox in those worlds when you study is they say once you become enlightened, you know you always were.
Oh, beautiful. That
Because
is
you're always
beautiful.
there. You always have your soul level of consciousness. You always have that. You just have forgotten. You just haven't been, a lot of us haven't been aware of that till you begin to
Mm,
practice a spiritual level. Although I think little kids are pretty much aware of that. And then the veil comes in, but they call
I
it the veil.
believe so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
what's the veil? Explain to us what does that mean? Because I believe that too. And children are just so innocent and they haven't been jaded by our world and they're like just beautifully open And I remember seeing like spirits when I was young and like people telling me like you need to go see a doctor and I'm like, but I know what I'm seeing and I still remember that, right? And then I was like jaded from that. And so in my mind, I was told I'm not actually seeing what I'm seeing and I shouldn't be seeing that. Anyway, what is the veil?
Well, and I just want to say that when I was young and I was telling my mom about different lifetimes, she took me to a doctor and said, "Why is my daughter telling me about Germany in great detail? She's never been there."
Wow.
And she took me
That's
to a doctor.
she's like, yeah, that would be a lot, right? Like, wow, that's crazy. That's amazing.
So I
Uh,
learned by going to the doctor, and it sounds like you did too,
yeah, they told
that
me it was because I had a fever and that I was hallucinating. And so
okay.
that yeah, that my fever was too high and I was hallucinating. But I saw this like spiritual family of like humans in my bedroom several times and I can clearly still see it and feel the feeling and the energy in the room and yeah, I didn't have a fever. Let's just say that.
And you can reawaken that. You can rekindle. That's what we're talking about here. When I'm talking about this type of meditation practice, we're talking about opening those spiritual eyes, your spiritual ears, your channel, your opening to the spiritual realms where those exist, where that exists. So it wasn't closed down. Usually around 7, this veil that comes in. It's a they call it the veil. It's basically it's a forgetfulness, I guess you might call it. Um, but I think more and more that's not happening for as many children. And then as you practice a spiritual practice, spiritual exercises, spiritual practices, meditation, whatever brand of that, whatever practice you have, um, and they change over time too, by the way, then you start to open that back up again. And you start to kind of carve through those levels of consciousness that we were talking about, an opening, like a tunnel back up into the higher awareness. And all awareness is available. That's what enlightenment is. The Buddha was enlightened. He sat under a tree. I think it was a banyan tree. I may not have that right, and he just sat there and he said, "I'm not moving until I'm enlightened." And he became enlightened. I'm not sure how many days he sat there. But he had tried
Wow.
all these other things. He went out in the forest. He denied his body. He did all these, Hindu practices. Nothing worked, but he had that longing, as they tell, of the story of the Buddha. So, enlightenment is available. Illumination, enlightenment, it's available for everybody. It's our spiritual promise, and it's where we really it's our true nature. It's our eternal self. And we can know all that while we walk this earth in an ordinary, everyday life in multidimensional awareness, being aware of the higher consciousness, the spiritual realms, the creators of the universe, the beings like you saw as we're walking. And it's not fireworks and it's not something that takes your breath away. It's really ordinary. And yet
Yeah,
it's so expansive.
I
Mhm.
was going to ask you to explain, just in simplified terms, like what does it mean to be enlightened? To be in that level of consciousness. What does that look like?
Well, it's going to be different for everybody, but
Okay.
what does it look like?
For someone who doesn't know that term at all, how would you
Okay.
explain that? Maybe explain it like you're explaining to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, just so we understand.
It's knowing who you are as a soul. It's knowing your eternality. It means you know yourself as you've existed forever. No beginning and no end, but you know timelessness and spacelessness. You know yourself in oneness with all there is, and you have a consciousness that is aware. It's a concept that's very hard to wrap your head around in words. It's a bit ineffable. That's why it's hard to talk about. And yet, when you have the experience, and I would guess that almost everybody has had moments of it, and most of us just pass by it. But when you
Mm-hmm.
start to pay attention, then your beingness knows everything and your oneness with everything, and you know what everything thinks, feels, the path. You know what existence is like beyond this world, beyond your physical existence, and you know love like you know love as the force of creation.
That's
And you,
beautiful.
hmm,
I like to sit in my yoga class and I'm a light being. So when
hmm.
I'm there and I'm like feeling like I want to channel love, I feel like picture myself illuminated and just shedding my light and sharing my light and love with everyone. And in that moment, it's just such a powerful feeling of love and just like complete, like no ego. Everything is just like genuinely, I'm feeling so like that feeling of love and light just like exuding from my body and in the room. And sometimes other people who are kind of on that level, I can feel them kind of perk up and feel it. It sounds crazy, but I honestly
Oh
can
no, that
see
doesn't sound.
that,
Yeah, of
like
course
the
you can.
power of that. It's just absolutely insane.
It's the most beautiful thing there is. And
Hmm.
we can live that all the time,
Hmm.
or a good bit of the time. I'm working on that all the time. I'm working on
Yeah.
expanding that. That's a beautiful, beautiful image. And I would say you're connecting into your true self, that
Hmm.
radiant being, your radiance. We are all radiant beings. We are all made of sound. We're all made of love, and we are all made of light. And just then to know that is to really know that. And then when you know that, you want to share it. And
Hmm.
it naturally
Hmm.
is shared by the overflow, by that light reaching out in that loving.
Hmm. Hmm. So I have a question then. I want to talk to you about what you can offer everyone and what you do and what your services are. But first, for everyone who is like fired up right now, they're like, how do I get started? What do I do? I want to get there. How do people just begin this process if they're, not aware, but they are really curious and they want to get started and, start meditating or learning about this? What do they do? And where do they find you?
Well, I would ask your listeners to consider that they probably already have a spiritual practice. And that could be just walking your dog. It could be just taking a moment in your shower and breathing and, just feeling the moment of that. It could be singing a song. It could be listening to a piece of music you like. Whatever connects you to your heart, that's a spiritual practice. So you just shift your awareness and acknowledge that for yourself. When you acknowledge the spiritual practices you're already doing as spiritual practices, meaning a practice that connects you to your spirit, to your loving, to your heart, to your wholeness, they start to blossom. They get fuller, these practices get fuller and richer and deeper. And if you want an ancient spiritual practice, because these have been done for thousands of years, probably as long as humans, then the most beautiful practice is to sit, like you were saying, you sit in your yoga class, or stand or walk in a place of stillness, connecting with your heart, paying attention to your breath, thinking of a word so you can guide your mind to quietness or to getting more quiet without trying to make it quiet, just one word, um, or even humming, and then listen, and then just listen. Listen to the universe. Listen to your heart. Listen to the what's eternal. Listen to what creates all of this.
That's
That's where
beautiful.
you
I love
start.
that.
That's where you
Yeah,
start.
that's so like I like how simplified that is, and I like that you acknowledge that simple things like going for a walk. That's a spiritual practice. People don't need to complicate it. Like we all have our things and it's all in us. So now I'm dying to know, and our listeners and our viewers need to know, where do we find you? What's your email or what's your website? And
Yeah.
what are the things that you can offer?
So what I did very, very recently is when people would come to me with questions like you had and ask me how do I meditate, and I can't meditate, I can't sit still. So I thought, well, I'll just give them a jumping off point or a way to deepen your practice. So I recorded 5 spiritual practices for each day and 5 audio
Mhm.
recordings, and it only takes 5 to 7 minutes. Simple, just like we've been talking about. And so we do an invocation, just kind of a way to set your intention and open yourself up to your spirit and your soul. I curated, um, I've studied all these spiritual teachers and all these different faith traditions and spiritual traditions. So I took some of the greatest spiritual teachers and I got some of their teachings and I put it down. And I speak what those teachings are, and then I made an affirmation from them to start to help direct your life in that upward flow and consciousness. And then I have a chant from one of those ancient Sanskrit mantras with music behind it. And that's a beautiful way to get into that field of energy. And then I have a guided meditation. So you can, and there's an app. You can get it in your email. It's a subscription. It's a beta test. So I'm just starting, basically just launching it. So it's $45 a month. And then once a week, I'll jump on a Zoom call with everybody. And if you have questions, like I'm happy, I'm there with everybody. I'm there talking through whatever you want to talk about. And I'm just there. And then I'll do a guided meditation once a week for folks, just that it's live. Um, and it's,
And what is your website?
soulandspirit.net.
Soulandspirit.net. Okay, beautiful. And we're going to have that in the show notes for everybody too. So they'll be able to find you easily. But what a beautiful thing to offer people.
I think it really serves a purpose. And there's a lot of meditation programs out there, but this one is different. This one really serves the soul and the spirit, your soul and your spirit. It goes very deeper, way beyond just calming your body or calming your mind. It's designed to reach into your soul, into your true self, and connect you there. That's the place where enlightenment begins.
Beautiful, beautiful. And with your 60 years of
Whoops.
experience.
There's the bell. Can I turn that off real quick?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry
One
about that.
second. So, Catherine, I just want you to repeat for everyone to hear, so why your program is different, why it stands out.
So soulandspirit.net and the 5 sacred practices, spiritual practices or meditation, it's different because it goes deeper. It works those channels of consciousness up into the soul. And
Mm.
that's where the enlightenment we were talking about, you have access to that over time. It's something that grows and blossoms over time. Um, some people some people connect into it right away. For me, I was on the slow path. I've been doing this for 60 years. It took me a while to be able to rest in that place. And I
Mhm.
of course practice every day because the practicing just opens and opens and opens your spirit and your soul. So you bring that divine essence down into your daily life. And life just gets more wonderful. It gets easier. What used to be my highs are now my lows. That's what starts to happen is your life begins to transform. You have this, like you have, I can see this glow about you. People have this radiance and it
Mm-hmm.
just shines, people shine. And what was challenging, life has its challenges. It's meant that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenges become portals of learning. You get that
Mm-hmm.
consciousness where these are for our learning, growth, and expansion. And in that place of approaching enlightenment, you pretty much know that everything that comes in your life is for you. It's for
Mm-hmm.
your benefit. It's in your favor.
Mm-hmm. I
And
love that. That is beautiful. That is so beautiful. Um, I really hope that you'll come back and do more shows
you're
because I feel like we just scratched the surface of this stuff today.
Well, I'd love to talk about the sound current. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. And there's a lot I can talk to you about this energy field that works with healing, healing of emotions, healing of body. Because when you get into that enlightened place, you have this energy at your fingertips, this field of the divinity that you walk in.
Mm. Well, I really, really, really hope you will be back. And our listeners and our viewers are hoping for the same thing right now. But for today, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. So we're going to have to say goodbye for now. But thank you so much, Catherine, for being a guest on our show. You're just amazing with your experience. Oh my God, like what a teacher. Like to hire you or to be involved with you as a guide would just be, priceless because I truly believe experience is better than, any education that you could ever get. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, I'm Lisa Urbanski with The Advisor.